Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Je vous remercie d'être ici pour une nouvelle édition de notre forum sur l'éducation et la vitalité de nos communautés. My name is Brian Lewis. I'm professor of communication studies here at Concordia University. I'm also co-director of QUESCREN and chair of the Interlevel Education Table, or ILET, that's sponsoring this conference. I'm going back a step. Launched in 2009, the Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network, or QUESCREN, is a collaborative network of researchers, stakeholders, and educational and other institutions that work to improve the understanding of Quebec's English-speaking communities and promote their vitality through research, knowledge, dissemination, and public events. Am I coming through that? Okay, thank you. At QUESCREN, we take pride in our many collaborative research projects. In recent years, we've increasingly focused on educational research since the beginning of ILET, both by supporting the work of what are now our 83 research members in our network who work in this field, and by leading our own project to address priority topics and gaps in knowledge. This forum reflects this commitment, a space to showcase inspiring projects, to speak, to spark dialogue, and to strengthen collaboration. It also serves as a space to showcase educational research to both policy and community partners, fostering meaningful connections between knowledge and action. We're excited to see what emerges from this year's lively and respectful discussions. As we used to say on the picket lines, ce n'est qu'un début. The Interlevel Educational Table, or ILET, is a long-standing example of how QUESCREN advances its educational goals. Through policy-focused publications, knowledge-sharing activities, and our biennial forums, ILET, which was established in 2017, connects researchers, practitioners, community stakeholders, and policymakers to exchange ideas, highlight innovative practices, and promote initiatives that support our diverse communities. Much of our work is online, and I encourage you strongly to look at what we've posted already, both in the QUESCREN website, in the ILET website as well. There's a ton of material there and a ton of possibilities. Collaboration and knowledge transfer lies at the heart of our activities and the heart of ILET's mission. It's a recurring theme at our forums as well, and it's a cornerstone of sustainable, inclusive English-speaking education system in Quebec. I want to thank Anna Hunt, Lena Shumrova for their leadership in co-chairing the ILET Program Committee for this year's edition. The Forum Program Committee's other members are Anne-Marie Check, Celine Cooper, Julie Corrigan, John Davids, Martin Durand, Linton Garner, Debbie Horrocks, Joanne Patterson-Meek, Nick Salter, and Stephen Thompson. They worked hard for over a year to bring this program together that we'll enjoy over the next 2.5 days, and for their financial support in making this event possible. I want to thank the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, as well as the Department of Canadian Heritage, Government of Canada, Concordia University, the School of Community and Public Affairs at Concordia, the Health and Social Services Network, and the Community Economic Development and Employability Corporation. I wish everyone a successful and inspiring Forum 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, QUESCREN and ILET, for inviting me to come and speak to you today. I thought I'd start with the plan of what I want to talk about. I would like to put forward an argument that generativity matters, not just for teachers, but for students in the classroom. And next, I want to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing to extend this idea of generativity as an intergenerational construct in the intergenerational spaces. I especially work in community activities, or what I'm hearing more and more now is referred to as third spaces, the spaces that youth occupy, not at home and not in school. Next, I'd like to talk about a project that I've just started, so we only have the beginnings of data, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts on it, of what generativity looks like in pre-service teachers. And then I'm sadly going to take what I hope is a positive and hopeful talk, and it's going to take a bit of a dark turn. And I'd like to talk a little bit about something that Canada is facing and that we all need to work towards, which is the increase of hate, of which young people are certainly a target to be joining these groups that are promoting hate and violence, and tell you a little bit about how we were using this idea of intergenerational generativity to get into the space of combating and preventing violent extremism. So, I want the work I do to outlive me. I want my life to mean something even after I'm gone. So this statement is not unique. In fact, I'd be surprised if there's someone here who doesn't feel that way. And so while it's very common, it can actually be a rather powerful idea. And I wonder if the very commonality of it, that we all share this feeling, is what gives it so much power, and whether we can use it to make things better together. So this idea of generativity refers to care and concern for future generations as a legacy of the self. It is the work that you do in a classroom teaching. It is curriculum planning. It is the work you do at maybe a policy level or other levels to affect system change, where you're working to create more equitable opportunities for learners and educators to thrive. It's creating solutions for problems we've never seen before. It's part of Erikson's seminal work in psychosocial lifespan development. And he told us it was the key work that we needed to do in midlife. And he was right. There's been an enormous amount of research to show that generativity is the key to thriving in adulthood. It predicts career satisfaction. It predicts good parenting, which we define as parenting that's high in warmth and high in structure. It predicts healthy relationships, healthy romantic partnerships. Generativity also has enormous societal benefits. It drives us to pursue better policy, to uphold important cultural traditions, to dismantle harmful practices, and even heal intergenerational trauma. In fact, in 2015, philosopher Nancy Snow suggested that generativity was a virtue necessary for flourishing in adulthood. And so it's for these reasons that I think that generativity is worth studying. So as I said, generativity sits at the 7th stage of Erikson's psychosocial development. Those of you who took child development maybe remember this chart somewhere in that textbook. I forgot to mention at the beginning that I will give you a QR code at the end of this talk that will have the entire slide deck to save your photo, your cameras. Generativity sits at the intersection of agency and communion, which is another reason why I love this construct so much. So we develop generativity as we build our capacity to advance ourselves, our skills and capacities of agency, at the same time that we are contributing to others or serving others. So when we build our own capacities in service of others, that is when generativity grows. As you can see from this chart, Erikson said that generativity was a midlife construct. Maybe that will grow. Maybe it did grow. And so it might be curious to you as to why I would be talking about it in adolescence, which is a whole 2 stages down. I will save you the work that I've done in the theoretical writing of Erikson to show that he actually is with me on this. I will get to generativity as an adolescent or intergenerational construct. But first, I just wanted to give you an overview of the construct as it's traditionally done in adulthood and a little bit about how we measure it. There it goes. That was what it was supposed to do. So I often get asked when people ask me about generativity, what counts as generative? It's a really good question. Is it what you're thinking? Is it how you act? Or is it the intention behind your action? So for me, I like to use McAdams' model of generativity. It's, I think, the most used model of generativity, and it considers 7 interconnected features of generativity, including inner desire or the motivation you have within yourself to be generative, external factors pressuring you to be generative, which he called cultural demand, then generative concern, which is the most commonly used measure, which is basically general motivations, leading to commitment including belief in the species or belief that humanity is worth contributing to, leading to commitment and action. And all of this is integrated into a generative story of self or a life story that integrates your generative purpose. So when we measure generativity, the most often measure we use that I'll be talking about a lot in this talk is the Loyola Generativity Scale, also developed by McAdams. It asks about general motivations to contribute to the next generation and to leave a legacy. When measuring generative action, I use the Youth Involvement Inventory. This is because the measure that's used with adults, which isn't used that much with adults either, isn't a very good fit for youth. So the Youth Involvement Inventory includes formal and informal helping behaviors at home and in neighborhoods, volunteer responding to requests for help, as well as volunteer leadership, political involvement, and even activism. And then finally, the narrative piece, we use the life story interview or sometimes portions of the life story interview. In McAdams' work with adults, he found that highly generative adults tend to tell stories using certain themes. For example, highly generative adults tend to have moral steadfastness as a through line throughout their life story. They also tend to tell stories where something bad or negative happens. They tend to make meaning of it in a way to connect it to something good or positive, which McAdams called redemption. So let me just pause for a minute and do a little so what about why should you care about generativity in adulthood. I think of generativity as something that I feel connected to. It's too much pressure for me to feel that I'm generative all the time. I do not feel generative when I'm washing dishes or making my bed. There are lots of moments where I don't feel connected to my generativity. I do feel connected to my generativity when I'm helping my daughter study for a test, which she just got an A in lifespan development, so I'm very happy about that. Or when I'm mentoring students, I feel very connected to my generativity. Also, storytelling is a great way to feel connected to generativity, whether that's with your friends, whether you write it down in a journal, or whether you're talking to professionals. Storytelling is identity work that helps us make meaning of how we want our generative purpose to be created across our lifetime. And in communities of practice of people who share the same goals for the kind of world they want to see. I have been working in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years, partnering with Students' Commission of Canada. We believe that youth voice should be heard and that when we include youth voice in decision making, things get better for everybody. So I feel connected to my purpose when I'm working with people who have the same shared goals as I do. So let me move to why I would take this adult construct and apply it to a developmental lens. Given how critical generativity is to adulthood, I wonder about the origins and growth trajectory of generativity. Do youth even have the capacity to be generative? Admittedly, this research has been an uphill battle. The idea of young people as contributing to society is unusual. Usually youth are considered, quote, the problem or problematic. And in fact, when youth take on generative actions, like the news stories that I have here, it's noted as unusual or unique, not typical. In psychology, still, the majority of research in youth takes a deficit approach. We focus on the preventing of negative outcomes or negative behaviors of youth. We look at preventing substance abuse. We look at preventing risky behaviors. We look at preventing mental illness. Very important, and we should continue to do that. It's really important work. But I believe it needs a balance of also looking at youth's capacity to contribute and youth's capacity to thrive. In 2000, a small and mighty group of researchers like Richard Lerner and Reed Larson started to take a strengths-based approach to their research in what they called positive youth development. This examines the developmental assets that support youth's right to thrive, and I've relied a great deal on these frameworks. This has been taken up, this idea of positive youth development and developmental assets, in community or third spaces, community activities, leadership activities, religious activities, sports activities. And we've started designing programs that build these developmental assets in so that we are increasing the probability and capacity for a child to thrive. This is very different from building programs that prevent them from engaging in harmful behaviors. Nonetheless, there continues to be a great deal of conversation suggesting that generativity only matters in midlife or middle age and beyond, including arguments that young people are too busy building their identity. I find that one interesting because adults are also very busy building their identity. So I don't really understand how youth can only do one thing, but adults can do more than one thing. Youth are too self-centered to think of others. Youth don't have enough of a sense of their own mortality to consider, however symbolically, they might outlive their own lifetime. So this is the work that I have been doing since my graduate work. A lot of it started here in Montreal at Concordia, my doctoral work with Annabeth Doyle and Dorothy Markowitz in psychology. We worked with a local English-speaking high school, and they were doing a larger study examining relationships and well-being in adolescence, and we conducted a 3-year longitudinal study with about 142 high school students. I believe that this remains the only longitudinal study out there still that tracked the generative course of adolescence. Remember that Erickson's model said that intimacy preceded generativity. So that's where we started in our work. We wanted to look at relationships in adolescence and see how they were related to early generativity. So we had students complete the Loyola Generativity Scale, as well as quality of relationship, which we used attachment theory framework, and caregiving behaviors with friends. And then we also had some measures of well-being, namely depressive symptoms and self-esteem. We also administered a portion of the life story interview and the adult attachment interview to 80 of these adolescents when they were about 15. Took a little longer than I thought, so some of them turned 16 in there, but they were about 15. We found that generativity was related to well-being in adolescence, and we found that since with other measures. And the next slide I'm going to show you, the next two, remember, I will give you the slide deck if you want to do a deep dive. I recognize that it's complex. That is because I wanted you to see that I really did my due diligence in this, but I will go over just the 2 points that I'd like you to get from the slides. See how hard I worked in my doctoral thesis? That's what I want you to get from this slide. Thank you. I expected that generativity would increase over time. After all, it peaks in midlife. It's most important in midlife. This was really one of the first studies to look at early generativity. So I thought we'd find low levels of generative motivation that would increase over time. We did not find that. We actually found a rather high average of generativity in 14-year-olds. In fact, we had a subsample of their parents answer a generativity question, and they had the same level of generativity as their parents. Moreover, it was a rather stable finding. I don't know if any of you did your doctoral work, how disappointing it is when it doesn't work out the way that you think, but this really depressed me at the time, although now I feel really great about it. It was a very stable over 3 years, 0.4, 0.5, so a really nice moderate effect. I really wanted to find change, and I did not find it. However, relationships did move the needle in generativity. This was the work we did with parents, and we found that as adolescents reported less attachment avoidance with their parents over time, they also reported higher levels of generativity. When you look at friends, early reports of high caregiving behavior with friends predicted higher generative concern 2 years later, even controlling for those concurrent measures. I also want to note that at this time, a lot of people were telling me that what I was measuring was just prosocial behavior in adolescence, not really generativity. So all of this data is controlling for prosociality. So we had another measure of prosociality, which we statistically took out. So there was something other than prosociality in this generative measure that was connecting to good and healthy relationships and well-being. We also asked these young people to tell us some stories about their life. We didn't mention generativity in these things. We just asked them to tell us about a time when they changed their minds. And again, we found themes of generativity, and we also found themes of redemption, which I'm not going to talk about here. So this is a story from a young 15-year-old whose average generativity score was slightly higher than average of the sample, talking about how sad she was that her boyfriend was gone for the summer. It is really hard when you're 15 and your boyfriend's gone for the summer. But realizing while he was gone that she had to get going for her future, because if she was going to have kids, she needed to make sure she was ready for it. And I loved that a 15-year-old understood the intersection between agency and communion in this story of advancing herself at 15 in service of parenting however many years down the road. I thought was a really interesting finding, and we do find that intersection of agency and communion. We've been replicating these findings over the years. We have found that generative concern in youth, adolescence, and early adulthood is related to well-being. It's related to healthy identity development. It's related to centrality of morality as part of your identity. We've found that it's related to engagement in activity, in all kinds of activities, sports, community activities, religious activities, and that they can tell really meaningful, insightful stories about what they're getting out of those activities, especially when they report high levels of generativity. We're also finding that it's related to generative action, of engaging in community, of making a difference in the community. So youth generativity, after 15 years, looks a lot like adult generativity, to be honest. Feels like a lot of research to just come out with one sentence, but that's what we've been finding. Our most recent study, a lot of what I was doing was typically in university contexts, because I do go for the easy samples. We wanted to look at youth and community. So this study, which is available on open access, and you can see the link when you get the slides, was with about 600 young people from across Canada. They're part of activities that are part of Students' Commission of Canada, and Students' Commission of Canada really works to serve youth who are facing barriers. So this population has a higher percentage of marginalized identities than maybe some of the other samples that I was able to collect. And here we were interested in generativity from an intergenerational perspective. So we asked youth about the adults they worked with in activities. And those youth said that adults who really valued collaborative learning, where both the adult and the youth were learning in this space, those youth reported higher levels of generativity in that activity. Also, adults who supported youth's ideas and supported the idea that you should have a voice and a say in decision making, that was also connected to youth reporting higher levels of generativity in those activities. So, what does all of this research tell us about what should happen in intergenerational spaces from generativity? I decided to let the youth tell you on this. This is a slide from a knowledge exchange that we did in community. It was COVID time, so it was online. We did a session on what does youth generativity look like for youth and storytelling. And then we asked them, what can adults do to help you build your legacy? And so you can see 91 youth answered. And in this bubble, the most important thing that youth said was listen. They also talked about trusting their ideas, giving them space and resources to work on their ideas, mentoring them, amplifying their voice, advocating for their right to be in the room where decisions were made, funding, encouragement. And I have to say, these are all things that I would have told you as well, of this is how we support early generativity. So hopefully I've established that generativity is something we should care about long before we reach midlife. And so I want to talk about it in more educational spaces. This study that I want to talk about was named Teachers Touch the Future by my colleague Lynn Aylward as a connection to Krista McAuliffe. When I was talking to my friend and colleague Lynn Aylward, who recently retired from the education department at Concordia University, she was interested in how generativity relates to educational spaces. And we were surprised to find that there's not actually a lot of work done in the realm of education and generativity. I found this especially surprising since teachers are in generativity work considered the exemplars of generative humans. In fact, when Dan McAdams is doing his research and he wants to find a group of high generativity adults, he goes to teachers to find them. Lynn Aylward is very interested in building the capacity of pre-service teachers to engage in equity work in the classroom. And so we were interested in how to combine my interest in youth generativity of pre-service teachers and her interest in equity work in the classroom. And in this, we did come across a framework that we found very inspiring and wonderful by Arnitha Ball, who's at Stanford, who really frames generativity and leans into this idea of the creativity and productivity components of generativity. So she thinks about generativity as the ability to create a solution for a problem you've never met before. And Arnitha was really interested in pre-service teachers who were going to go and work in diverse classrooms when they had never been part of a diverse classroom before. So how do we build the capacity for our teachers to solve problems that we don't even know exist yet, or that they have no lived experience with? So we've really relied on this framework and the earlier work with youth generativity that I spoke of before to look at, does generativity have a place in the training of teachers? Should it be something we're talking about in curriculum for pre-service teachers? So there's not much out there. So we've really kind of started with the ground of, is generative concern related to motivations to become a teacher? I really hoped yes, because everything in my life says that it's true. So if this one didn't come out, it was really going to be a tough one. And also when we ask teachers just generally, what are typical behaviors that a teacher should think about doing? Do we see any evidence of generativity in their answers? So we asked 200 pre-service teachers at Bishop's University and at Acadia, generative concern, and we also used a more typical motivation for teaching that we found in the literature, including extrinsic, like the security of the job, summers off. Is that true? I feel like that's not true. Intrinsic motivation, that you're teaching a subject that you really care about, that it's going to bring a lot of meaning to you, and altruistic of pro-social slant. We also asked them to answer the question of what a teacher would typically try to do, or what they typically try to do when they're in a classroom. Whew. It is related to motivations. So my whole understanding of this construct that I've invested my life in is still on solid ground. It was generative concern was related to all motivations for teaching. I was a little surprised that it was related to extrinsic, but it was certainly more and significantly more related to altruistic and intrinsic motivations for teaching than it was extrinsic. This is important because we know that altruistic and intrinsic motivations for teaching is related to a better experience of teaching, better job satisfaction, better performance, and better retention of teachers. Oh. Moreover, when we asked them about typical behaviors in teaching contexts, generativity was a very prominent theme in what they were talking about, whether it was about building lasting connections with students, becoming a role model, creating safe spaces for learners, or even creating ways of doing better for students who are typically underserved. So we found a lot of support for Ball's call to a generative action in education, and that maybe we should start thinking about incorporating this idea of generativity in our curriculum of training teachers, of giving them opportunities to connect to their generative purpose in their own teaching career. Even in early adulthood, generativity matters in terms of the kind of identity work and choices that young people are making. And the open-ended responses also showed some interesting connections between interest and equity, which again, we did not prompt for, and generativity, which we would like to explore more systematically. So we think this is a promising finding, and we're interested in doing more work in explicitly including generative concern, generative identity, generative purpose, whatever you want to call it, in education curriculum. So now it's time for that dark turn that I promised you. Hopefully, I will get to a redemptive moment of what we're doing about it. But this is the final project I wanted to talk to you about, which we call Hearing Unheard Moments. So how did the positive psychology, generativity, youth should have a voice, and youth are awesome person get into violent extremism spaces? In my role as the Students' Commission of Canada, we were asked to bring youth to an academic conference in the prevention and countering of violent extremism in Alberta. We were bringing youth there to build the capacity of adults working in that field to see youth as partners and work with them on this problem, rather than to see youth as the problem that they were working on. So it was our job to include and engage youth in this program. It's a whole other talk about how that went and how many bumps in the road we encountered. I am a professor, so in order to get this trip to Alberta paid for, I gave a talk. I don't know anything about violent extremism, and there are a bunch of violent extremist experts, so there was certainly nothing I could tell them. But in trying to craft a talk, I realized that when you look at the recruitment material for violent extremism, for white supremacy, for all those things that you know, it is rife with themes of generativity. Youth are particularly vulnerable, and I find it interesting that a mainstream society that does not include youth in conversations of generativity, those youth might be particularly interested in spaces where they are included in conversations of generativity, where they're told immediately they can make a difference, where they're told immediately they can leave a legacy and have an impact. I'm not going to present you with some of the recruitment material that we found. I realize that that is not what you signed up for at this conference. So the only one that I'll present is sort of a taste, and don't look for it because you'll get caught in an algorithm that you don't want to be in. But one of the interesting things that I hear a lot in the rhetoric of recruitment is think of the children. And when you look at the news stories, that often is the reason that some of these violent actors give that put them over the edge to do some really unspeakable acts. So with the support of Public Safety Canada, who bought what I was selling at that talk, we engaged in a research project that took a generativity lens to the trajectories of those people who engaged in extremist groups. We looked at the autobiographies that were already published, and we were also able to interview 4 former violent extremists, and we administered the life story format. We did not ask specifically about their journey into these groups. We asked about their entire life. Indeed, we found that generativity was a theme for why these youth were vulnerable to the recruitment efforts of these extremist groups. And some of these formers, as we call them, had quite high leadership positions in these groups. So they really went far in these groups. A lot of it had to do with really having a need to make a change or seeing what they needed, seeing what they thought needed to be done, and not being given space or voice to be heard in how they wanted to engage. There was also a sense of not belonging in spaces where change could be made. Interestingly, and I wasn't looking for it, but it was there, we also found that these adults also talked about generativity as an exit strategy. Exiting these groups is not easy. It's a lot of work. It requires a lot of support. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. As these adults started to connect to their own generative purpose that was more individual and less linked to rhetoric that they were hearing, for example, their need to be artistic or creative, or their generative parenting, or what they want to be for their children, or how they want to be remembered for their children, or just in general what they want to leave behind. These were the kinds of things they were talking about in the stories they were telling of how they started to think about leaving these extremist groups. So in each story we heard, we saw opportunities where if we had a time machine, we could go back and interrupt that young person's trajectory into those extremist groups. And these studies suggest that if we create more constructive spaces for young people to explore their purpose and generativity, they might be less vulnerable to recruitment into these violent spaces. This supports the broader literature in prevention of violent extremism that really looks at the importance of youth engagement in community, promoting belonging, promoting safer spaces, and promoting uncomfortable conversations as powerful tools in this space. So this led us to a project we called Hearing Unheard Moments, or HUM. The first one we did at Jouvence, which is in Orford, a beautiful place to go. We did it with a group of young people from the Eastern Townships and a group of people from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Prince Albert is one of the places in Canada where we're worried about what's going on in terms of extremism. They're facing some barriers in that area. We used creativity as a way to connect with young people. One of our great professors at Bishop's, Dr. Rebecca Harries from drama, came and taught these youth about theater games and forum theater and theater as a social justice tool. We also had a professional comedian come in and teach them about what good comedy looks like. And then we commissioned these young people to create products that they could use in their community to combat or interrupt hate. So these are some photos from that workshop. The one at the bottom is a play that they created in the workshop around, it was around how adults allow bullying in classrooms and sort of showing how they saw that happen. So that's Lachlan about to tie his friend's shoelaces together in the play. So we commissioned or paid, thanks to the support of public safety, these youth to create products for their community. I have the website where you can see the projects here. There'll be a QR code at the end if you want to check them out. One of the products created by some of the really great youth from Galt High School, they created a series of skits around what it would look like if families made decisions like governments make decisions. So I encourage you to check it out. It's pretty good and a little frightening. One group from Prince Albert was interested. They did this activity where they had two young people who were on different ends of the political spectrum, and they sat down in the same room and they both keyed in the word Seattle to their Google on their phone and found vastly different suggestions. Thank you. And this really led them to talk about how the algorithm is driving polarization. And so these young people created a little, I don't know, animated sketch about algorithms and decision making and critical thinking for youth. That little project is now a national project, one of the flagship projects of Public Safety's Community Resilience Fund. We have 9 partners across Canada, including BGC, which used to be Boys and Girls Club, Pathways to Education, National Association for Children National Alliance for Children and Youth, GoodBot, which is interested in good internet policy in countries where there are no internet policies, Child Development Institute, Next Gen Men, which is a fantastic group that does some really great work online to promote healthy masculinity. Together, we've developed these 4 core messages around everyone having value. At this public safety conference I went to, a really brilliant Muslim leader said that nuance is the enemy of polarization. And getting curious when somebody says something that's difficult or maybe even offensive can really reveal what's underneath that offensive comment, and instead of leaving them out, can welcome them back into the mainstream. That there are skills that we as adults can continue to learn to be more inclusive of youth and give them space for their voice, even if it's a voice we're not particularly comfortable with or are struggling with. And that we need to keep creating space for us to have difficult conversations, difficult discussions in safe and healthy ways. Hopefully, generativity is a word that you'll start using when you're thinking about your own practice in the spaces where you're working. And hopefully, generativity is a term that you're going to start to use when thinking about the work that young people are doing with you. It is really powerful when you name a young person's idea or work as generative, especially because they don't hear it very often. And I think it would be quite transformative if we all started naming their work as mattering, as impactful, and as lasting beyond their lifetime. If you're interested in joining the Hearing Unheard Moments movement, Montreal and Eastern Townships have been identified as 2 of the places of the 9 places in Canada where we're going to start working. You can go to the website. We're always uploading more tools that we're developing in partnership, but we can also, you can get in contact with Students Commission and be part of it in a different way. I'm so grateful to get to work with amazing organizations that support youth generativity. I'm even more grateful for the countless undergraduate students who have really helped build this program of research. Their ideas, their work, their energy, their humor has really been one of the best parts of my job. So thank you, and as promised, the slide deck. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm inspired. And I assure you, Heather, that as a teacher educator, we are thinking about generativity. I don't necessarily use that term, but maybe I will from now on. We need to meet more often, have some coffee on campus. Just to share an example, we have a number of student teachers heading into practicum, right? That's practice teaching. And it's one of the most, I argue in my work, one of the most exploitative practices we have in teacher education, because we helicopter these strangers into classrooms. And a lot of times the students don't know what's going on and they lose their teacher. And so part of my research was talking to youth about how do you feel about that? And I'll tell you, they have things to say. And not exactly saying legacy, but they felt that they do feel that they have a role in supporting the professional learning of new teachers. So that's some of the work that I'm doing now. So I want to tap into your work for sure. So we will chat. Okay, so this is a Q&A period now. So if you have questions, please use the app or just put your hand up and I'll run around. That's why I didn't put heels on today. Okay, so we'll go 1, 2, 3.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that starts with like so much optimism, because even the part where you think it actually gave me hope. So thank you very much for that. My name is Sarah Magas. I started a non-for-profit that I called Mamie Merveille and Granny Wonderful because I'll put French first. It's my mother tongue, but I love English just as much. And I moved to Montreal 20 years ago. I'm trying to help the community the way I can. So I could have many, many questions for you, but one, because you ended on your undergrad at Bishop's.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out my partner is a Gator. So, you know, when you said, is there someone from Bishop's? I don't know, but like we have two daughters and apparently they already have to go there eventually. So I guess my partner and my daughters may be Gators one day too. My partner did her undergrad at Bishop's, and then she went to do her PhD and her master's degree at St. Mary's University in psychology. She graduated in IO psychology, in organizational psychology. My question to you, because you studied your studies here in Concordia, what difference do you see between a campus like the one we can have here in Montreal and the one that you can have at Bishop's that's very different because you're attracting different type of undergrads in psychology? If ever you have some thoughts about that. It might be for a thesis, but
yeah,
we'll work on that.
Yeah. In fairness, I was a student at Concordia. And I'm a faculty member at Bishop, so I maybe have a different lens. One of the reasons I was attracted to work at Bishop's was how prominent student voice was from the beginning. I was in my interview, the students took me for lunch at a golf course, and they were all graduating, and they were harder on me than the faculty were. But in the most beautiful way of you're coming for the next generation of Bishop students and don't screw it up. We've got something good going here and we want to make sure you're not going to ruin it. And I thought that they were spending a day to find the next faculty member who was never going to teach them because they were graduating. I was very inspired by the work those students were doing for the continuity of their institution. I see a lot of student generativity at Bishop's. The fashion show, I'm just so inspired by, where they raise enormous amounts of money for charities every year. Mental Health and Wellness Week was built by students at Bishop's. So maybe I can see it better at Bishop's because we're smaller, whereas at Concordia, I was kind of in Loyola and less connected. But Bishop students have really motivated me to keep going when I was getting from my reviewers of generativity is theoretically impossible in youth, so you can't do this work, or all of those things. When you're seeing it happen around you all the time, you're like, how can it be theoretically impossible when they just did it again? So yeah, thank you for that question.
Hello, my name is Sapphire. I work at Y4Y as their community events organizer.
Oh, I love Y4Y.
Woo!
Youth.
Yeah, thank you for speaking on behalf of youth and presenting all this information. Extremely valuable. I was just like nodding the whole presentation. Anyways, so my question is, I have two questions actually. One, how do we begin to target the hate demographic that reside in smaller communities, unlike Montreal, where we have more access and resources, but they're much more isolated? Like, where do we begin to target them?
Yeah. Prince Albert is very happy that you're asking that question in Saskatchewan. They are one of those communities who is just not accessing resources, and they're another area that we've selected as for our HUM projects, as well as other rural areas. And one of the things we first came up against was BGC, which used to be Boys and Girls Club. They don't have a person there. So we were, in the other places, we were like, okay, so here's the person who's already connected and we're just going to do that. But there was no infrastructure in PA to do that, to your point.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that we're proposing our theory of change, for those of you who like knowledge mobilization, is that these 9 organizations that we're working with, instead of all of us going to public safety and saying, here's our little piece that we want to do, we decided to do it all together as one group. And we're hoping that what Moonshot knows about distracting youth from extremist content online will benefit what we're doing in engaging youth, and our expertise in engaging youth will support what BGC is doing at a sort of greater level, or Pathways to Education, which is really interested in graduation rates for high school, and who we know can connect with Pathways, and Pathways has connections to who we know. So our hope is that that synergy is going to broaden the reach and give us space to work in those more rural areas. But rural is one of the areas where we as Students Commission, we consider marginalized of barriers to opportunity. So it is one of the places where we put a special work into connecting and accessing. So I just think that's a brilliant question.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was, I mean, this is the research is an amazing first step to making change in general towards attitudes towards youth. And one of the main spaces where youth spend time, obviously we know, is school. So what's the next step in integrating these ideas into the education system and allowing youth to have more space and belonging?
Yeah. That's another good knowledge mobilization question. So for us, HUM is about building capacities in adults to be better responsive to the needs of youth. So Students Commission has been doing youth conferences more than 50 years now, and has really figured out an important formula for how to engage youth. Now we're trying to make that formula Canada-wide. So HUM is really focused on building the capacity of adults to create safer spaces, to curate difficult conversations, as opposed to, if I don't agree with you, I don't talk to you, which is problematic. And to be more inclusive. So that's one of the ways. Is that going to solve everything? No, it's just sort of where we're starting. But it's exactly the right question we should be asking. Yeah, so thank you for that, Sapphire.
As I make my way over to Patrick, we'll ask this question. What is generativity? But what is it? Is it a function, a way of being? Is it innate? Are you born with generative capacity? Can you learn it?
Yeah. God, I don't know. You're not born with it, I don't think, because it requires a certain amount of cognitive complexity that you don't have in infancy. Though there is some really great research out there out of BC to show that we're born pro-social, which I really kind of love. I believe that generative capacity is something that you build. I believe that it's actually all those things. It's a motivation, it's a behavior. I believe that you build it through identity work. I believe you build it through purpose work. I believe, and that's why I think storytelling is so important. I think that's why McAdams uses storytelling so much in his generativity work, because when we tell stories about who we are building our identity, and connecting what matters to us, what we care about, what we would like to do with ourselves. I hope that answered that question. Probably, yeah. You should do that research. That'd be good.
Patrick, do you still have a question?
So in the first bit of research you presented, I guess your finding, if I understood correctly, was that adolescents have as much generativity as people in the middle age. So I'm wondering, does that invalidate Erickson's model that you showed at the beginning?
Erickson said that all stages occur at all stages of the life. So there's a really nice picture of a rug that his wife built. This is the question that I'm working on now. I don't think that youth generativity is the same as adult generativity. I think maybe I was wrong to think about it as increases and decreases. I've started thinking about maturity of generativity. Because when you ask young people, and I don't have a publication for this, but if you'll believe 20 years of conversations, I ask young people about generativity and they say things like, I want to change the world. I just want education to be better. I just want clean water for everyone in Canada. These are wonderful things, and we should for sure do that. But as they mature, you start to hear a little more nuance and a little more connection to who they are. I want to create spaces where youth feel like their voice matters. That's what I've dedicated my life to. I want to create an education program where teachers can thrive and educate the next generation. I want to paint something that is going to help people understand my culture and where I come from and why that matters. So there's a maturity that I hear in adult generativity, that is not an insult to youth. It is just that they are on a growth journey of exploring a lot of possibilities of what their generative purpose is. And as they grow, I think they whittle it down to what they want to do. Does that?
We have time for one more question. And as I look out at a sea of adults, okay. Heather, do you find that ageism plays a big part in why youth feel limited in building generativity?
They're in school right now. But actually, adult spaces are not meant for youth. Yeah, actually, it's a really interesting question that we have all the time. Yeah, but do we want to, is there one you want to take? I don't know about examples of generativity curriculum. I hope you email me if you have something. Lawford@ubishops.ca. Methods or activities to effectively support generativity for teens in third spaces. That's a great one. So I have to say that when I create activities for youth, I create a whole lot of space in between because the identity work happens with me after the activity. The activity is really just the warm up of getting to know me, but it's while we're walking to the next activity or having a cup of coffee where I really get a sense of who they are. And then I can start to have a conversation about what kind of difference they might want to make. And once we've established that, then I can have a conversation about what kinds of opportunities or organizations they want to connect to that can help them do that work. So on the HUM website and on Students Commission, there are all kinds of activities that we do, 4 corners and step into the circle, and sometimes just the west wind blows, which doesn't have any deep meaning at all, but oh my gosh, do youth love it? And then they'll talk to you because they're all excited and they ran around. So I think that's what I would do, is I'd build the activity with a whole lot of informal space around it, because young people talk to you outside of the activity.
And the last question looks like a good one to lead us into our
linguistic
session.
minorities. Yeah. So I didn't talk about my youth generativity study where we did life stories of highly generative exemplar youth. All of them, as it turns out, we weren't recruiting for that. All of them identified as having a minoritized identity, including linguistic minority. And what I found really interesting from these youth that really changed my idea of generativity is all of them said, much like David Hogg and much like Malala and the sort of generative exemplars you see in the news, you'll see them say this as well. Their generativity came out of, I'm not going to let this happen to the next generation. And actually really anger that they have to do this work because we failed them. There's a real anger at adults that we have failed them, that we did not do what we should have done of create a better space, create a more equitable space, create the opportunity. So now they have to do this work because they cannot wait until they grow up. They cannot stand to let another youth go through what they went through. It's really quite, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. But I find a lot of minoritized youth have and who are generative have an anger component to that of, I'm going to do this because you failed me grown up, which is true. I totally did. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Thank
thank you
you.
so
Thank
much.
you very much.